Ed, Bob Lazeri, Tony D'Angelo,
Good evening, Ed.
we're honored to have you on, Ed. It's been a pleasure being in touch with you. Our first guest really couldn't make it tonight, Ed, and we spent about 20 minutes talking about the 71 White Sox, which we went through the entire roster and talked about it, and we'll definitely incorporate more of that in here. But let me just give our viewers, Tony, some information about Ed Herrmann. Born in San Diego, signed by the Milwaukee Braves as a free agent back in 1964, would make his major league debut in 1967 with the Chicago White Sox at the age of 20. Grandson, Tony, of Marty Herrmann, who pitched for the Brooklyn Robins in 1918. Now, Ed, I don't think you saw him pitch, but that's something else. Was he ever an inspiration to you, Ed, growing up? Your grandfather, because he had played pro ball?
He was a major leaguer.
Yes, he definitely was an inspiration. In fact, we used to go back to Cincinnati, which was his home, for vacations when I was a young kid, and he actually bought me my very first catcher's glove.
Wow. That's something. 1918, Tony, Brooklyn Robins, National League.
Yep.
As far as Ed's career, folks, White Sox from 67 to 74, played with the Yankees in 75. California and Houston between 76 and 78, and ended his career in 1978 with the Montreal Expos, Tony. An all-star in 1974. And what I found fascinating, Ed, when doing some research, Ed Herrmann led the American League in intentional walks in 1972. Ed, that shocked me, and I want an explanation. How do you attribute leading the league in intentional walks in 1972?
Well, a lot of it has to do where Chuck Tanner had me hitting.
I got you.
What he did is put me in positions where the next guy would have a much greater opportunity to hit.
I got you.
Depending on the score and that. So it was all Chuck's way of setting up lineups. And, to this day, I still believe he's one of the best at putting together a lineup to get the most out of each and every one of us during that ball game.
That was definitely going to be one of our questions, Ed. We had talked to Carlos May a few weeks back, and I think, Tony, he had a similar opinion about Mr. Tanner.
Yeah,
but
he certainly did.
From all things we've heard, a player's manager to the max, and that's definitely from Carlos May. Question, Tony, for Ed.
And Ed, this has always been a curiosity for me. I'm going to ask you another question after this, but have you ever been confused in your life with Ed Herrmann, the actor?
More than once.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, I had an opportunity to actually meet him many years ago, and it was quite a strange meeting because here I am really in awe of this guy that's a huge movie star, and he in turn told me that he was very happy to have the same name as both of us had.
Wow.
Because he once in a while was asked about playing baseball.
Mm.
So
I think he
it was
played
quite
Lou Gehrig
interesting.
in the movies.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
Wow, isn't that something?
Uh-huh.
You're watching Monday Night Sports Talk here on CTV 14. On the phone with us from the West Coast, former Major League catcher Ed Herrmann. Ed, I was looking at some of the managers who played under, obviously, Chuck Tanner. If I'm going to go out on a limb, was probably one of your favorites. And I found it interesting that both Bill Verdon and Dick Williams, Ed, you had played for as they were managing different teams. I mean, you played under Verdon for the Yankees and Houston, and Williams for California and Montreal. That's something that you don't see often,
Quite
Tony.
an interesting statistic.
So that's definitely making the rounds. What stands out to me, Ed, when you got to New York, you also played under Billy Martin for a short time, I believe. Carlos May actually didn't have the nicest things to talk about Billy. He said he had his favorites. Just wanted to get your quick opinion, what you thought about playing for Billy Martin.
I enjoyed playing for Billy. I thought he was a very knowledgeable man. The only problem that I had with him was after the ball game, the way he criticized people, and it was usually after he had himself a couple of cocktails.
Yes.
If he was going to criticize, do it in an area where it's not so public.
Yeah. We got the
But
same.
other than that, he was a motivator. He was in the same class as a Lou Piniella.
Yes. Who was a former teammate of yours, correct?
Yes, he was.
With that
Both of us
75.
played for Billy.
Yes. But, yeah, that's exactly kind of like what Carlos said to us,
Pretty
Tony.
much, yeah.
If he liked you, you were okay, but
Right.
if not, it was one of those things.
Well, it was
and-
always the 9 guys that hated you away from the 9 guys that were undecided.
That's right.
Because that's what
But,
we always heard.
But coming up, when you made your major league debut in '67, Ed, at the age of 20, that's very young. We talked about Terry Forster
Right.
came up, was on that '71 team at 19 years old. At age 20, do you think you were really ready for the majors?
Well, I thought I was because I was capable of catching a knuckleball,
Oh, sure.
and at that time in '67 we had 3 knuckleballers on the White Sox staff.
Wow.
So it gave me a huge advantage, and by '69, when I became the everyday catcher, they got rid of J.C. Martin, who was the only other one that really handled knuckleballers. Dwayne Josephson had a tremendous problem with it. Jerry McNertney had problems. So, and even John Romano, when we had him for the short stint that he was in Chicago, none of them were capable of keeping more balls in front of them that got by him.
That's
So,
a good question.
I inherited.
Yeah, being here near Boston, Ed, I do a Red Sox report on ESPN Radio every Saturday, and I watch Wakefield, obviously, and have for years, and see Victor Martinez, Tony, did a good job catching him last week, which
Yes, he did.
surprised everyone.
Yes, he did.
Is there any secret, Ed, to catching a knuckleball, or is it just you get used to kind of like shimmying around? I don't know if there's anything you could teach anybody about catching a knuckleball.
Well, the way that it was taught to me, and we've worked on different areas of it, is, my focus is about 12 to 15 feet in front of home plate, and hope that happens to be the last time that it breaks.
Oh, yeah. You just never know. It's
No, not with those. And probably the hardest one ever to catch was Hoyt Wilhelm's,
Oh,
because
yeah.
his had no consistency at all.
Wow. So you just didn't know. And we were, Tony and I, before you came on, Ed, were talking in length about Wilbur Wood. And we just came to the conclusion.
Quite an amazement to us.
We talk about pitchers who had dominant, not
periods
just,
or
yeah, let's just say
or
periods.
of years.
And if you had told me, and looking back, I do remember it happening, but a guy that won 20 games 4 years in a row, won 90 games, Ed, between 71 and 74, some impressive numbers. If the name Wilbur Wood just never comes to light when we talk about like a dominant 4-year period of
Right.
pitching. Was it just because he was a knuckleballer?
I think that had a lot to do with it because he was a fluke. Nobody really got to know him.
You're right.
And, he wasn't your typical 6'3", 190-pound pitcher either. So, a lot of people didn't recognize him as the great pitcher that he was. I remember catching him 3 times in double hitters. Nobody goes out and throws back-to-back games.
Yeah, that's what Carlos May told him. He said, I was there, and yeah, you could look it up. And he pitched that 74 season, I think, at 320 innings, which that's kind of mind-boggling. What also blew our minds, which we were talking about before we came on, was Bart Johnson throwing 178 innings in relief in 71. Which, we're throwing numbers out there, Ed, that are just so hard for the people of today to believe, but it did happen, and Ed Herrmann was there.
Yeah, it did, and I'll tell you how it happened. I'm heavily involved with youth sports out here in Southern California. What happened back then in the 60s and the 50s when we were growing up is we were out playing in the streets, playing baseball all the time, stickball. Kids nowadays have too many other ventures to go on than sitting out in the middle of the street with cars running up and down trying to play games.
Excellent point. We talk about it frequently here.
Yeah, and, they don't throw the ball every day. Our arms, and my arm right now, I still go out and throw an hour to an hour and a half almost every day of batting practice.
Wow.
And, my arm does not hurt because of all of that activity growing up in the, from the 40s to the 60s before I went into pro ball. And I think that pitchers today, they throw during their games. They very rarely throw on the off days when they're in high school or even college. When they do throw, they don't throw with the velocity that they need to build the arms up anymore.
We've talked to probably every pro player that's been on here.
Retired pro player, yes.
About that same thing, and they say similar things, Ed, and it's such an amazing thing to me. I guess Nolan Ryan is trying to
somehow reverse
it in Texas now, but it's a societal thing, and I don't know how far he's going to get doing that, Tony, because just the way Ed said, it's not like it was back then when we were using it all the time.
Yeah.
Like guys like Tim McCarver has said, or Jim Cott.
Right.
Well, a former teammate of Ed's had said on a telecast a few weeks ago, your arm will rust out before it wears out.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
Question.
And, Ed, I just look at the team that you were with in those days, and when you guys used to come into New York, I'd be very excited about seeing you. I mean, Dick Allen, Pat Kelly, Mo Drabowski, Rick Riker, young Goose Gossage. Couple of recollections about some of the players that you played with and, perhaps your best friends and their characteristics?
Okay, probably the guy I'll always remember the most is Bill Milton, who he and I both came from Southern California. Both were very close, both roommates. But the guy that I think was probably the greatest ball player that I ever played with was Richie Allen.
Well,
Please tell us.
He carried the club in 1972, 73 even. He was just a player that came out and hit the ball extremely hard, ran the bases perfect, playing first base, had great hands, and he was a leader in his own way. Every one of us respected him, and he respected all of us for what abilities that we had. Pitchers like Wilbur and Jim Pott I'll remember for many, many years because of how many innings they threw and how hard they worked to get to the point, where they could throw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of innings every year.
Yeah, that's we had talked in length about Dick Allen before we came on, and it seemed that the problems that he had in St. Louis or Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Tony, when he got to Chicago, and Ed, he seemed that he found a home there. He was very comfortable.
He seemed much better adjusted.
Loved playing for Tanner, I guess.
It was, Chuck didn't make Richie do anything that he didn't think that he himself would be forced to do. And that's why all of us as players love Chuck, because he never made us do anything that he wouldn't do.
Yeah. Terrific manager.
Oh, phenomenal.
You're watching Monday Night Sports Talk. On the phone with us, Ed Herrmann from California, former Major League catcher. Ed, I'm looking at also, and what stands out obviously in that 72 team, he had a 20-year-old Goose Gossage. At the time he came up, we knew he could throw it through a brick wall.
Yes.
Did you ever think he had Hall of Fame potential, Ed, back then?
I did. I thought he and Terry Forster had the potential to both be big-time pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, our old pitching coach, Johnny Sane, said he wasn't sure how long these guys would pitch in the big leagues because they threw too hard.
Wow. And
And
Goose
as
lasted
you know,
how long?
Yeah.
He did okay,
Yep.
Goose did. But,
Yep. Terry was in there for quite a while, too. He just, the weight got on him and kind of hurt him a little bit. But Goose rallied constantly and kept coming back. And it was, he was a great guy, a good friend, and I'm happy that after all of these years, they finally recognized how good he really was and put him in the hall where he belonged years ago.
And that's a guy that would get saves, not your one-third of an inning save, Ed. He pitched more than 3 innings on many occasions in relief, and it was so happy to see. No pitch counts, and I think Tony wants to ask you a question about pitch counts, too, that's for sure.
Yeah, Ed, it's like I'm driving on the highway today, and I hear this justification for Joe Girardi saying, we can only pitch Jabba Chamberlain 3 innings. And I'm like, gee, are you going to pick him up at school and give him his pablum when he's done? What's happening here? I don't understand this at all.
Well, the game of baseball has gotten so defined now that pitchers are basically starters or 5-inning pitchers. Then you have that guy that kind of guides you along till the 7th inning, and then you have 7th, 8th, and 9th inning pitchers. And, it goes back to what I say. People that are in high school now, and I coach quite a few of them. They're not even 7-inning pitchers in high school.
Yeah.
They're so pampered that we probably keep no more than 5 innings, and then we'll bring in 2 other pitchers to close out the games in high school.
Yeah.
And everybody's getting used to it.
That's
and
the
I
thing.
wish that someday we would get back and get the people that are making the big money to be out there and in front of the people that are paying their salary longer than 5 innings.
Which is really the other thing, because people pay a lot of money to go to baseball games. And like I heard earlier today that Miguel Tejada was rumored to, more or less kind of let balls go by when his team is way up or way behind to help his friends. And, I mean, that's a terrible thing. And it's just, you really want to see your team trying as hard as they can to win, I believe.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Even the year that the White Sox lost over 100 ball games, at least we went out there every game trying to win. We knew we didn't have the talent to compete with a lot of the teams, but we didn't just go out there and say, here, the game's over with, let's get it done and leave.
Yeah.
Right.
It's it really is something, and again, it's a societal thing, Tony. I just have a problem with a guy pitching, and we see it all the time here, 5 2/3 innings, maybe 3 earned runs, and he'll get a standing ovation. Now, if a Wilbur Wood did that back then, he'd probably leave with his head down saying, I'll get him next time. But it's just that's just the way the society has handled the whole thing. Monday Night Sports Talk on the phone with Ed Herrmann, former Major League catcher. That 1 year you spent in New York, Ed, again, what a cast of characters there, too, Tony.
Sure.
When you have a Sparky Lyle, a Catfish, Greg Nettles, you talk about some fun in the clubhouse. But I want to ask you, since the book came out, Tony, our friend Marty Appel, the Munson book, and Ed being a catcher, Munson was one of those kind of guys that had a gruff personality, Ed. We heard good things, bad things. What kind of relationship did you have with him, and your opinion of Thurman Munson?
Thurman and I were good friends. Great man. What can I say? He was a competitor, a captain, a leader. He did everything that was needed to be done to win a ball game. And he pushed a lot of us to limits that I don't think that a lot of the guys knew they were capable of reaching.
Wow. That's
but he would he should be in the Hall of Fame, too. I know he doesn't have all the numbers because his life was cut short.
Yes.
But he would have been one of the premier catchers, and I'm talking in Johnny Bench status, if he would have lived and continued his career in New York.
It would have been seemed like Tony would have been a consistent 300 hitter.
He would have
captain of a team that can do that at the catching position would definitely be a no-brainer question.
And Ed, if someone met you for the first time and asked you, what is your favorite baseball memory in being in the big leagues, what would you tell them?
Probably my very first at-bat at Fenway Park.
Wow.
Only because my roots kind of came from there. That's where, Grandpa and all were from.
Right. Yes.
But walking into a park like that, and I was fortunate enough to have a mother that grew up with Ted Williams and went to high school with him and all. And
That's a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
yeah, it is. In fact, when Ted was managing Washington, it was a standing dinner every time the White Sox went in. I got to go out with him, so it was quite an honor.
Now, what were your impressions of Ted?
The greatest all-around ball player, I mean, hitter by far. But he did a lot of funny things out in the outfield that a lot of people didn't realize. He was a pretty good outfielder.
I guess Eddie being compared to DiMaggio at the time, who was an incredible center fielder, but Williams, it was almost like that was the comeback about Ted. Well, DiMaggio might be a better outfielder, but I heard a lot of good things about how Williams played the walls at Fenway and whatever.
Yeah.
But kind of goes under the radar.
Yeah, he was the one that taught Yaz how to do it.
There you go. Yeah,
and Yaz became unbelievable playing balls off the wall.
He certainly was unbelievable.
Yep, and I'm looking at a couple other things here, Ed. We got a few more minutes. I'm looking at toward the end of your career, playing in the Astrodome. You know, a lot of people kind of think that wasn't the best place to play, obviously, for hitters or whatever. I'm looking at some of the, right away, Tony, we've talked about on MNST before, pitcher James Rodney Richard.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Ed, did you ever catch him there like in a night game when you couldn't see?
I caught JR a lot. Sometimes I wished I wasn't there.
And all we remember, Ed, was a 6'8" tall guy that can just throw the heck out of the ball. Again, a guy that ran into health problems later on, and what a tragedy. Yeah. But maybe tell our viewers about J.R. Richard. A lot of them probably never heard of him, but he was something back in those early, mid-'70s, I should say. Maybe a little synopsis on what it was like catching a guy like that and how hard he threw.
Well, J.R. threw as hard as anybody, including Nolan Ryan.
Wow.
He had a slider that was Bob Gibson type. And he had all the potential in the world, very overpowering, very dominating, very scary because of his height. And a lot of batters that had faced him that I had talked to later in life all said that when he let go of the ball, it seemed like the ball was about 10 foot from us or from me, you know, when I was hitting, because his stride was that long and his arms were extremely long.
Wow.
But if he didn't come down with that problem that he had, no telling how good he could have been.
Yeah, that we think, Tony and I will talk about tragic stories like that, about what could have been, and his name is always at the top of the list. Because at the time, and you know, I'm looking at other players, pitchers that Ed played with, and some real good ones. You had Larry Durker at the time. Tony was still a Houston Astro, and then when Ed moved on to Montreal in '78, his last year in the majors, you had a Steve Rogers. You remember Steve?
Steve Rogers was
very good. And Ross Grimsley, Tony, was a 20-game winner just down the road here, 10 minutes from us. He's the pitching coach in Norwich right now.
Yes, he is.
Ross Grimsley, but had a good year in Montreal. And maybe you could tell, after playing all those years in the States, Ed, was it a good experience going to Canada?
You know, I had fun up there. The fishing was great. Dick Williams was a man that was trying to win with a bunch of older ball players at the time.
Yes.
You know, even though we had the young kids like a Gary Carter and a few of the other ones. But Dick really traded to try to get a bunch of veterans, and we just got tired. We couldn't really handle September the way that we used to, and unfortunately, things didn't work out for a lot of us.
Yeah, it was the '78 season, Tony. Ed's last in the majors. '78 spent. Was that when they were in Olympic Stadium at the time, Ed?
Yeah, they were still there.
That was
after the Olympics.
Thinking of Jerry Park and those days we watched in the early '70s there. But
that park was a tough one to play in, especially early in the season with all the snow on the ground.
Yeah, held about 27,000 people. Ed, or
today it would be a human rights violation, actually.
But again, we got about a minute or two, Tony. Let me ask one more question of Ed. Maybe Ed, you had mentioned. Well, I'm looking at some of the other players. I'll get off that for a minute. But how about your favorite parks besides maybe Comiskey, Yankee Stadium for a left-handed hitter? It might have been a nice place. Maybe you had mentioned Fenway. Any other places you really like to go to, Ed, as a player?
Well, I loved a lot of the old parks. I love playing in Yankee Stadium. Of course, I love Boston. I really loved the old Detroit Tigers ballpark.
That was a neat park.
Tony, you were there, right?
I was there.
Yeah.
I understand in the control room we have about 1 minute.
Okay. People, and it's funny, Carlos May and everybody, and Gates Brown we had on the show, they all mentioned Tiger
Warmly
Stadium,
spoke of it,
Fenway
yes.
Park,
Yes.
Yankee Stadium, and I think that's amazing. Ed, our time is just about up. It flew by, and
So
just
nice to have
want
you,
to
Ed.
thank you so much for calling from the West Coast. Maybe we could do it again someday. We want to wish you continued luck. Again, Ed works with the youngsters, Tony, out in the West Coast, 8th and 9th graders, also does scouting, Seminara Sports.
That's a subject for
West
another-
Coast
yeah, for
recruitment,
another
so,
show.
but we can do more of that later. Ed, thanks so much.
Thank
we'll
you,
be
Ed.
in touch, and thanks for being a terrific guest tonight.
Well, thank you, Bob and Tony. I appreciate the time.
Okay, thank you so
Thank you,
much,
sir.
Ed.